My work is a balancing act, with me trying to maintain both the academic and human components of what it is I'm covering. It's way too easy to lean one way and neglect the other, and this is a problem that only becomes more prevalent as the topic becomes more personal. That's why in March of 2021, I revisited my criticism of ContraPoints and her video defending a domestic abuser. It's why I remade my video on Xanderhal's efforts to exploit my history as a survivor of abuse, because I felt like I'd failed the first time around. I had tethered my own emotions, limiting myself in ignoring the deep psychological impact they'd had on me. So you can probably imagine how difficult it must be to discuss the fact that Riley Grace Roshong used a recent death in my family to kick me whilst I was down. And nobody said anything. Well, I haven't forgotten, so let's take a look at what happened and why acts like these define the dirtbag movement. But before we can delve deeper into all that, I just need to give a content warning for the following: COVID death, ableism, domestic abuse, childhood sexual assault, gaslighting, transmisia, and transmisogyny. If you like our work, please consider supporting the channel via Patreon. You can also support us by liking, commenting, and sharing this video on social media. Hi there, my name's Apple Thurston, she, her, they, them, and it's time to actually finish the fourth and final installment in my series, Meet the Dirtbag YouTubers. It's been almost 2 years since I published the last one, but better late than never. So let's start with a hypothetical. Imagine you are a trans YouTuber who has been open about their history as a victim of domestic abuse and child sexual assault for the past decade. Imagine that a popular trans YouTuber, someone you once looked up to, came out in defense of a man who had publicly abused his ex-wife. That the popular YouTuber covered for him by lying about what had taken place, whilst making out that anyone with access to the very public evidence of his abuse was a Nazi stalker pretending to be trans. Imagine that, as you spoke up on the issue, a cis person who openly admits he was once a Nazi began hurling ableist and transmisic abuse at you in defense of this popular trans YouTuber, going so far as to violate your history of abuse and childhood sexual assault, weaponizing it as a means to frame your criticism of abusers as the signs of mental illness. They even go so far as to present it as evidence that you, a victim of domestic abuse and childhood sexual assault, must be an abuser yourself. Then imagine that a third person, someone many people saw as a kind and compassionate member of the non-binary community, cheered the cis person on as he turned to said violence, only to resort to transmisogyny itself when you called the non-binary person out on its own actions. How might you feel at this point? Well, I want you to imagine that it doesn't end there. Imagine that a person who was, until recently, an open Trump supporter, decided to insert herself among that conversation. Imagine that she approached you, pretending that she simply wanted to end the tension, whilst in reality, she just wanted you to silence yourself. Imagine that, as you were left distraught from a recent loss in your family during a global pandemic, trapped thousands of kilometers from the rest of your family, that said person goes out of her way to imply that you don't really care about your deceased loved one. All because you didn't respond to her in the time nor the manner she demanded. The sad fact is, I don't have to imagine any of this, since that is my very real experience with the dirtbags, ContraPoints, Xanderhal, Luxembourg, and finally Riley Grace Roshong. Now, I've already covered the first 3 in separate videos, each one fully referenced, and watching them will give you a greater understanding of this video, so do check them out. That said, you could probably get by with just the Xanderhal video, which is key due to Riley and Xanderhal's close relationship, at least at one point in time. Now, we'll get to Riley's emotional grave robbing in a bit, but first, I need to give you a basic understanding of how I first came into contact with her. I also wanted to talk about how her approach is intellectually dishonest, as well as how she enabled Xanderhal's exploitation of my history as a survivor, something I think speaks very strongly to why systems such as rape culture and victim blaming are so prolific in Western legal systems. Because if you didn't know, Riley is training to become a lawyer, or at least she was when I started this video way back in 2021. And whilst not all lawyers are terrible, Riley is very clearly indicative of a mindset that legal training does nothing to remove, resulting in incredibly sadistic behavior going unchallenged. She genuinely seems to get pleasure out of making people suffer. Now, I realize I am not alone in this. There are many people Riley has treated this way. This is why she left YouTube at one point, and whilst looking to return a year later, has largely failed to. I am not looking to erase what anyone else has been put through, I am merely looking to finally have my say about this woman, at which point I'll finally be able to move on. When she first reached out to me, I had absolutely no idea who she was. Hell, I'd had no idea who Xanderhal was until he came at me out of nowhere, and it was her efforts regarding me that would lead the two of them buddying up in 2020. So Riley emerged shortly after our stream detailing Xanderhal's transmissic and ableist behaviour. Riley reached out, letting me know that she created a response titled Armchair Psychology, Is Xanderhal Ableist?, after having watched Xanderhal's follow-up stream to the one we just done. Quick note, she'd later admit that she hadn't watched the actual stream by myself and Levi, which Xanderhal cuts off early into his stream, meaning she didn't actually know our arguments, so yeah, not the best first impression. But I watched her video anyway and wrote a response thread detailing several concerns I had, including how Riley just accepted what people stated about me in the comments of her video. The example I gave was a comment in which someone stated I'd criticised Zoomer Nation for defending pedophilia. Only problem is, I don't know who Zoomer Nation is. Not that I didn't know, I still don't. Riley replied by simply accepting it, saying that, yeah, she was kind of figuring this out when it was just patently false. Again, not the best first impression. I also took issue with how she framed Xanderhal's demands that I allow him to abuse me live as a conversation, noting how it ignored the context of the threats of physical violence Xanderhal had publicly encouraged. I noted how Riley continuously used trivializing language like beef to describe the issues I took with this behavior. Then we get to the big one. My criticism of the way in which Riley framed Xanderhal trying to force the answer he wanted out of his fans in regards to my history of abuse, apparently proving that I had an abusive personality, was him listening. Like, hell no. Not only did he have to be told to stop repeatedly, but he'd circle back and try again later with the notable support of Xanderhal. Suffice to say, the video was a big old platter of nothing, and none of this filled me with much confidence regarding Riley. However, she'd later update the description in her video. I acknowledged that she'd made it with only half the story, which was still her responsibility, but she was rather new to all this and was just finding her feet. I remember how rough around the edges I was when I first started on YouTube, so I thought that maybe we could have a conversation and asked when she had in mind. That's when she sent me a Google document listing her issues with my video, which, wow, there is a lot of bullshit here. My main issue, and the one I raised with Riley, was the way in which, in spite of completely accepting the facts that what Xanderhal had done was both ableist and transmissic, and that he'd continued to do these things after being informed on this repeatedly, he somehow still wasn't a bigot, at least according to Riley. No actual explanation of how, just magic. My confidence in Riley's ability to look at things objectively was completely destroyed. She was playing defense lawyer with actual abuse I suffered, in spite of her not getting paid. Like, at least if she was getting money, I could kinda understand that as a motive, but no. She was doing this for fun. So after Riley responded by claiming I'd mischaracterized her, without explaining how, and attempted to make the conversation all about intent, ignoring how intent becomes irrelevant if you continue to cause harm after you've had it explained to you, I told her I was no longer interested in talking to her. Riley responded by informing me that she'd go on to talk to Xanderhal before producing videos on the topic. And produce videos she did. She published What is an Argument on the 26th of March 2020, What is Bigotry on the 4th of April 2020, and What is Bias on the 12th of April 2020. The total runtime of which was 2 hours and 15 minutes. It's worth noting that she also removed her original response, which, whilst watery as fuck, was still a damn sight more critical than her 3 follow-up pieces, the reason for which was pretty clear. By this point, Xanderhal had begun taking Riley under his wing as his token trans person to pinkwash the ever-growing transmedia scandal surrounding his name, which for the uninitiated is why he rebranded his channel from Pig Puncher to Xanderhal in the first place. Now, there is a little more to this story, a couple more exchanges by Twitter that we'll come back to later, but in large, that was my early experience with Riley. She was someone set on wasting the time of everyone else, dragging discussion about important topics like bigotry and violence to the semantic extreme, the absurdity of which I hadn't witnessed since my days arguing with young earth creationists about the definition of atheism and scientific theory. And that's an impression that only grew as I began to review Riley's videos. The level of intellectual dishonesty Riley relies on is just incredible. Allow me to give you a couple of examples of some of the most absurd instances of what I mean. Starting, of course, with Riley's apparent confusion as to whether or not I own a prism. No, I am not kidding. She genuinely doesn't seem to know whether I'm capable of locking Xanderhal away. Why do I say that? In her video, What is Bigotry?, Riley begins talking about the standards of proof used in court at the 46-minute mark. The two main standards being beyond reasonable doubt and preponderance of evidence. Beyond reasonable doubt requires the plaintiff, the person bringing someone to court, to disprove all reasonable alternatives being the highest level of evidence required in a case. Preponderance of evidence, meanwhile, requires the plaintiff to merely show that what they are accusing the defendant of is simply more likely than not. Now, how do the courts arrive at a decision about which standard to use? Well, thankfully, Riley tells us in her video.
The thing about these standards is that they are both textual and policy justifications for either standard. So generally speaking, I don't know if y'all can hear that. The city is still burning around us. I apologize. But anyway, when you use a beyond a reasonable doubt, so we're just going to talk about like when you do it in the court of law, right? When you use a beyond a reasonable doubt standard, it's A, when you are in a criminal trial, and B, when you are looking at prison sentence as a punishment, right? Whereas preponderance of the evidence is used more for suits, right? Lawsuits, things which are not going to result in jail time, right? Primarily, those are the main difference in how those standards are applied.
Putting aside the facts that this is not a legal case, thus these standards have absolutely no relevance here and are only being brought in as part of Riley's ego, accepting the hypothetical she's brought forward, I hadn't accused Xanderhal of a criminal action, and I certainly do not have control over a prison. So preponderance of evidence would clearly be the correct standard. right? Right? Well, Riley is not so sure.
And so the reason why I had a little trouble choosing between which standard to use here is because there's not really a great analogy to the law as far as like a claim for bigotry, right? Like this is a social content. This is like a very social construct, right? It's something which is for the most part protected as free speech. Of course, you have a right to be an asshole. Now, there are certain contexts where people's free speech are not protected. That's a whole nother discussion. But generally speaking, from my understanding as a law student, there's not a great analogy to be able to draw here. So it's not like I can textually look at one or the other. And if we're making policy decisions, this sort of goes back to the conversation on cancel culture, right? Because this could be described by Xanderhal as an attempt to cancel him, as an attempt to try and ruin his career by, coloring his moral character poorly. But Essence of Thought might also make the argument that it's not that it's like the Essence of Thought and the people who are criticizing or attacking whoever you ask, as Xanderhal, are just criticizing him, and that they would argue that he would actually suffer no harm as a result, right? So you have two different arguments for either burden. I can't say which one to apply, so I'm just going to analyze under both, and I'm going to let you as the audience do what you will with that. All right? Cool.
Did you notice how Xanderhal is just criticizing me, whilst Riley lets slip the idea that I'm attacking him? This is in spite of the fact that Xanderhal came after me, violating my history as a survivor, hurling transmissic and ableist rhetoric at me for no reason, all whilst encouraging physical violence against me. All I'd done is hold a mirror to his actions. But Riley is very deliberately choosing the language that paints Xanderhal in the most charitable light, whilst painting me as the aggressor. Transmisogyny rears its ugly head once again. Fact is, whether or not my criticism of Xanderhal leads to his career being harmed is completely irrelevant, since that is a financial loss which would be analogous to a civil lawsuit. It is not, and I can't believe I'm having to explain this to a law student, it is not equivalent to being put in prison. But this really is demonstrative of Riley's abilities, or more accurately, lack thereof. She can't structure an argument for shit, and she can't follow a thought experiment to its conclusion. That's why she wastes everyone's time with vapid nitpicking regarding the definitions of words that the rest of us have a functioning understanding of. Riley's entire channel was built around her engaging in rampant sophistry. It's an act designed to give her the appearance of being intellectually capable to a passerby. Meanwhile, the moment you scratch the surface, the whole thing just collapses in on itself. You realize she's a fraud. This incident, by the way, is why myself and Levi began joking about me keeping him in a birdcage, the cage being the non-existent prison Riley seems to believe I own. Because that's the level of absurdity Riley is selling her viewers. But it gets worse, since not only is Riley engaging in sophistry to build her career, but she's uncritically promoting far-right propaganda, as can be seen in this section.
We're going to do something interesting today. We're going to start with 3 hypotheticals. First, imagine that we have a baker. Let's say that this baker, let's say that they live somewhere in the South. Let's say more the rural South, the kind of place that you probably, if you are of a minority status, probably want to avoid. And let's say that this baker gets some customers that comes into his shop. Let's say it's 2 men, and it's 2 men who go up to him and ask this baker to make a cake for their wedding. And let's say in response, the baker responds that he will never make a cake for them. And specifically, the reason that he says he will never make a cake for them is that he will not do something which he says, quote, violates his religious beliefs. All right, so that's the first hypothetical.
Now, to any LGBT plus person who has been online the past decade, you probably recognize this narrative as the one Republicans began screaming from the rooftops in 2013 during the Sweet Cakes by Melissa case. What they always leave out, however, is the fact that the Christian bakers in question, Aaron and Melissa Klein, not only refused to bake a cake for a lesbian couple, but subsequently published their private information online. Because whilst the far right would have you believe that this is simply a case about Christian bakers refusing to bake for a lesbian couple, the truth is much, much darker than that. The lesbians in question, Rachel and Lowell Bowman Cryer, were getting married after the sudden death of a close friend so that they could legally adopt the friend's 2 daughters, Lizzie and Anastasia, whom they were currently fostering. Both girls are autistic, with Anastasia having not said a word since her mother died. It's also worth mentioning that Lizzie has cerebral palsy, and thus they both require special care, and the Cryers felt that they were in the best position to provide that, whilst also allowing Lizzie and Anastasia to stay in the same community they'd grown up in. But in order to make the fostering permanent, they needed to get married, or at least that'd help their case, which is where the Kleins come in. Yes, the Kleins refused to bake the Cryers a cake when approached, but what's important is the fact that the Cryers reported their discrimination using the proper means, resulting in a copy of said complaint being delivered to the Kleins' bakery. That's when the Kleins published the Cryers' private details, including their home address, phone and email, to Aaron's Facebook, leading to said post going viral with homophobic hatred. Now, not only were the Cryers terrified of losing the children, but the abuse got so bad that they had to move town just to escape it. This is the origin of the far right, the bakers simply refused to bake a cake. This is the narrative that Riley is helping propagate, bulldozing what actually happened and helping them bury it. What really gets me here is that she's talking about a legal case, you know, her area of interest, and yet I actually know what happened better than her. Either that, or she's deliberately misportraying the case to make the far right seem more reasonable. Nah, I'm sure the self-admitted former Trump supporter wouldn't be doing that now. But yeah, if you support Riley, whether financially, vocally, or any other way, this is what you're supporting. Piss-poor arguments mixed with far-right propaganda. That's all you're supporting. How people like Xanderhal and Riley expect to be taken seriously by the left when they've done absolutely nothing to deprogram the reactionary parts of their being is beyond me. But hey, since when have reactionaries actually resorted to, you know, reasoning? So, with Riley destroyed on an academic level, among other things, let's move on to how she enabled Xanderhal's ableism, specifically his violation of my trauma as a survivor of domestic abuse and childhood sexual assault. This whole thing escalated when Xanderhal, who was defending ContraPoint's open worship of known domestic abuser Buck Angel, decided to try and exploit my history as a survivor of domestic abuse and childhood sexual assault to conclude that I must have a, quote, abusive personality, end quote. Why? All because I dared call him out on his history of ableism and transmisia. And that's when Riley decided to insert herself into the conversation to play defense lawyer, part of which is the assertion that he's changed, as can be seen in this clip.
So what happened was that I ended up having a conversation with Xanderhal, all right? And we ended up having a conversation basically to the effect of the issues I have talked about so far. And I wanted to ask him specifically about his intent for why he made the arguments that he did. And this is a clip where he talks specifically about that. I'm going to let it play. I'm not going to interrupt. I'm not going to mince his words. I'm going to let him just say his piece, and then we'll resume the conversation. the thing that I take issue with is like taking that to imply some sort of mental defect or disease, right? Like that seems like sort of a non sequitur. It's that like as far as your argument goes, it does not necessarily seem to be like I don't understand the necessity to connect that to like a mental defect or disease. Like it seems both unnecessary for your argument. Like you don't need to make it for your merits. You can just say that Essence of Thought, if they did that, is a bad person. I don't see why trying to imply some sort like something beyond that is necessary for you.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the things I regret about my my covering of Essence of Thought is that I don't feel like I did the best job of like covering myself on the ableism claim. My claim was never that like Essence of Thought has some sort of mental condition that makes them act the way that they do, and so that is why they engage in the bad faith abusive behavior that they do. My take was more so that people who, and I think you'll agree with this, I don't think this, like you need to agree with this. Generally, if you grow up in a fucked situation, there's a high likelihood that you're going to go through your life believing that that kind of behavior is acceptable, right? So if you have like abusive parents that like lashed out and hit you when you were a kid, whenever you did something wrong, you may grow up thinking that it's acceptable to hit somebody or get violent if that's what you're in. That doesn't mean you have any type of mental condition, but it is an explanation or a possible reason for why you think it would be appropriate to behave in that way. And I feel like that's probably what happened with Essence of Thought. I guess that's armchair psychology, but just from my experience, that was my assumption. Just because Essence of Thought has talked about how they've been abused in their life, and it just seemed like a reasonable conclusion to come to.
Twice in a row. I'm sorry. I'm really trying my best. It's also very late and I've had a long week. But anyway, no time for excuses. Let's get going. So in case you did not hear, effectively what Xanderhal said was this, right? That Xanderhal was not trying to talk so much about Essence of Thought having any sort of mental disease, but just that Essence of Thought, because they had certain mental issues that Essence of Thought has talked about before, and that this Essence of Thought has been the victim of abuse from a younger age, then that would make it more likely that Essence of Thought would become an abuser later on, right?
So Xanderhal did the exact same thing as before, nothing substantial has changed, and yet Riley has the bloody nerve to piss down my back and claim it's raining? It does not matter how Xanderhal phrases what he said. He has no fucking right to resort to such psychological violence to violate and exploit my history as a survivor of domestic abuse and childhood sexual assault to assert said history proves I must have an abusive personality. There is no way to do that and for it not to be violent. None. And for Riley to bring up my PTSD, reaffirming what Xanderhal said, whilst also referring to it as a, quote, mental disease, end quote, is proof that she is just as disgusting as he is. Yet Riley continues to smile, acting as if this is a slam dunk, because cruelty is the point of all this, not empathy or finding common ground, because she sees it as her job as a would-be lawyer to inflict as much pain on the victim as possible to try and force them into silence. That's who she is as a person. That's how she perceives the world. A fact only demonstrated further by Riley's emotional grave robbing. So as mentioned towards the end of the section discussing my history of Riley, that wasn't where things ended. Riley kept sending me her videos as they came out, trying to get a response from me. However, something else, something far more important, had happened by this point. On the 25th of March, the day before Riley posted the first of her videos, myself and Adita were struck by the loss of my great Tantanelle due to COVID. My mum had called us and explained the situation. We were distraught. Not only had we suffered a loss in the family, but I was trapped on a completely different continent to the rest of my family. I couldn't be there for them, especially my mum, herself being separated from my extended family. So when Riley tagged me into a thread with her video, I simply quote tweeted our announcement, leaving things at that, and she seemed to accept this, telling me to take as much time as I needed. Problem is, I'm a workaholic. It's hard for me to just turn off and do nothing, particularly at a time where it feels like my entire world has just shifted. There's always going to be a part of me that wants to carry on as normal to prove to myself that things are the same as before, which is why I began watching Riley's videos. That was entirely my mistake, and I accept full responsibility for that. Because what I saw, the lies, the bullshit, the far-right talking points I'd been dealing with for years, dressed up as progressive, it triggered me. And I mean that in the most sincere sense of the term. I went in thinking I was strong enough to deal with such reactionary talking points. I quickly found out that I was very wrong. Problem is, that grenade pin had already been pulled. I had this spiteful rhetoric bouncing around inside my head, and I needed to get it out. I needed to vent. Of course, I wasn't in any sort of mind to get into a fight, so I took to something virtually unheard of for me. I vague tweeted on the 30th of March, stating the following. Quote, "For those unaware, saying I refuse to waste time debating semantics largely agreed upon by everyone not acting as a defense attorney for bigots is not the same as asserting that discussion over the definition of bigotry is forbidden. It simply means I don't see said conversation taking place in good faith, since you have a clear bias intended to get your client off. You're not arguing on grounds of honesty or objectivity, and describing the facts that words have a more broad meaning than the 2 to 3 synonyms typically offered in the dictionary is not the atmosphere effect, it's a basic fact about language. This discussion reminds me strongly of the way MRAs, priests, and their defense lawyers like to run around asserting that it's not technically rape unless penetration has taken place, acting as if that strict medical definition applies to all circles and usage outside of said strict definition results in the breakdown of the English language and debate. No, that's just a slippery slope fallacy." End quote. Again, vague tweeting is something practically unheard of for me. I'm someone who has carved a name for herself in standing up to people many times larger than me, enduring months of targeted abuse and harassment. Riley, meanwhile, was just starting out and had no such power. She only had a couple thousand subscribers by this point. Therefore, the fact that this was the only way I could process my emotions regarding Riley's reactionary views, allowing me to focus on my family and my recovery, is very telling of just how bad of a mindset I was in. Now, Riley found out about the thread, and in spite of the fact that she wasn't named, decided to make out that I jeopardized her entire career. Why? Because I said she was acting like a defense attorney. This was in spite of the fact that, by her later admission, the only way she could get in trouble over this would be if Xanderhal assumed she'd passed the bar, used her advice, only for things to explode in his face. So even if what I said wasn't clear, that's an issue easily resolved by, her telling Xanderhal that she's not actually his lawyer. So it was a non-issue brought up by her as justification for smearing me. But things didn't end there. For you see, Riley couldn't help but decide to target my Tante Nell in her video. After reading out our exchanges, getting in a huffy about the fact that I didn't respond how she wanted, when she wanted, instead prioritizing my immediate health and the well-being of my loved ones above her perceived claim to fame, this is what she had to say.
So they didn't really need that much time to, rest from their tragedy, but anyway, let's go on. So they didn't really need that much time to, rest from their tragedy, but anyway, let's go on.
Riley was willing to target the love I felt for a recently deceased family member, all because I'd bruised her ego. There was absolutely no reason for this comment, save for the desire to inflict pain and provoke further response. It was an act of pure cruelty, a fact reinforced by the face Riley decides to pull whilst making this comment. Though Riley is not alone in this approach, cruelty is and always has been the modus operandi of the dirtbags in general. Just take a minute to think about all the dirtbags you know and compare how they present themselves to how they actually act. Dirtbags love to claim that they fulfill a service to the left, in that they don't expect people to be perfect, meaning that they can unite more people under one banner. Yet when you look at what they mean by imperfection, so racism, transmisia, and ableism to name the big three, they are responsible for like 90% of the big incidents. What's more is, they are completely immune to growth. Why? Because they don't actually care about uniting the left. They care about causing as much chaos, as much turmoil as possible so that they can profit off of it. Infighting on the left is their trade. That's why Natalie Wynn made the pivot to centering her apparent cancelling as she made bank on Patreon, taking shots at marginalised communities she has always looked down upon. That's why a person like Xanderhal will happily break bread with Nazis whilst violating something as deeply traumatic as my history of domestic and childhood sexual abuse as evidence that I too must be an abuser. That's why people like Luxander cheer on these efforts, openly admitting that it's afraid of being called out on its own bigotry and that it would rather have a system of zero accountability. That's why Riley swooped in, claiming to be a neutral party looking to settle discussion, only to lash out the moment I didn't treat her like an authority. Dirtbags are to community conflict what arms dealers are to war. The sooner we realize that, the sooner we can start fixing the problem. The last thing I like to cover in this video is why I'm making this video now. Why haven't I just allowed things to fade? I am well aware that, over the last 4 years, the content of my channel has drifted further away from tackling arguments and more into doing exposés of abusive people, something that leads many of my critics to accuse me of drama mongering, an accusation I fully expect to be launched at this video. But to those who claim such a thing, I have to ask, what's the appropriate reaction to being targeted like this? Why is the onus on me to always ignore the harm people are doing to me? Why is it never on the people enacting said harm to be better? Reminder that this entire thing started because I, a survivor of childhood domestic abuse, took issue with ContraPoints defending a known domestic abuser, while simultaneously accusing her non-binary critics of being secret Nazis, only pretending to be non-binary. You know, the same style of accusation transmissus launch at trans women wanting bathroom access, that we're all liars and has some sinister ulterior motive. Nothing I said was abusive. I wasn't refusing to engage in conversation, I merely provided the facts of the situation and said my piece. And yet, because a cis guy decided to engage in incredible psychological violence with the support of both Luxander and Riley, I'm supposed to just move on. Where is the justice in that? I'm genuinely curious as to people's response, since every step of the way, as I've done my best to process what I've been put through as a trans YouTuber, I've been told that I just need to get over it and stop dragging up drama. God, I fucking hate that word and how it's become a staple of abuse culture. I'm reminded of all the times I was told as a kid at school that if I just ignored my bullies, they'd go away. Do you want to know what actually happened? The bullying got worse. That's why, when I started college, I promised myself I would never limit myself for the comfort of others when it came to standing up against abuse and cruelty. I don't react to these things because I can't ignore them. I react to them because no human being should have to ignore the violence being done to them. That is a principle I preach to others. Thus it is a principle I try to live by myself, to set an example, to be the change I want to see in the world. And yet, in spite of all of that, I cannot deny that I still fucking hate the fact that I'm having to do this. Don't get me wrong, I understand why it's necessary, but that doesn't mean I enjoy it or that I get some kick from it. I feel as if I was standing in a hole which reached above my head, trying to climb out, only to be buried up to my waist in sand. Sure, I would much rather climb out to focus on other things, but every attempt I make is just drained by the sand. So I start digging it out, tossing it as far out of the hole as possible. Until I start closing off these issues, having my final say on things and getting that closure for the abuses I've been made to suffer, I'm not going anywhere. Because the situation won't let me. So if making this video 3 years later helps with that, then damn right, I'm going to make that video. This is in spite of the fact that, as far as I'm aware, Riley is dead as a topic on YouTube, having abandoned it long ago after she got dragged for targeting her fellow dirtbags. Interesting how they're okay with abusing anyone except the people in their circle. Point is, there's no financial or algorithmic benefit here. I fully expect this video to bomb, but that's okay. Not every video has to be for the greater good. Sometimes just having my say is what matters. That said, if you appreciate what we do here and want to help out, please consider becoming one of our wonderful patrons who make all this possible. On that note, we'd just like to thank the following people: Matthew Kovac, Gert Van Voorst, Hannah Banghart, Marble Wings, Sosh Daniels, Flynn, and Higgins the Seagull. And from myself, Adita, and Levi, take care now.